How many people here admit that lack of coffee makes them crazy? A few of you. I can't handle coffee. Coffee does make me crazy, and I need more and more of it. And coffee, for a lot of you, you can't get here to church on a Sunday morning without it. I see some of you showing me right now. And we serve it, so obviously I'm not preaching against coffee right now. I'm just bringing up a point that sometimes chemicals affect the way our brains work. And because coffee is so powerful, we hear all these little catchphrases like death before decaf. And coffee helps me maintain my never killed anyone streak, which is always a streak you want to maintain. And then coffee, a warm, delicious alternative to hating everybody every morning forever. I can't handle it because when I have it, I need more and more of it. And I know that's not the case for some people. And if I was to drink a cup of coffee right now, if I was to go out there and get some of our delicious coffee, which I crave and I want, I would be awake until next Thursday. I would be just wired, and I would be closer to God. I'm the first to admit that. Like during that time period, while I was juiced up on coffee, like God seems imminent. I mean, I hear His voice when I read the Bible. It makes sense. Like, woohoo! Everything is wonderful, right? Fantastic. The issue is that I'm going to come down from that. And then tomorrow, I'm not going to feel so close to God anymore. And I'm not going to feel like I like much of you at all anymore. And I'm going to get headaches. And then if I keep drinking it, I'll need just a little bit more to get that same woohoo thing going again. Like I'll probably go from 1 cup to 2. I got to the point where I was doing 1 cup a day, but then it got a little ridiculous. And some of you are like, well, I only have a little bit of coffee, and you're making pictures of it every single day. But I can't have caffeine. I can't even eat chocolate. Like if I have an M&M today, I'll have a headache tomorrow. That's how hypersensitive I am to this stuff. But what I want to bring up today is just the idea of how controlled by chemistry we are. I've heard blinded by biochemistry and controlled by chemistry. And that's kind of the topic today, is that you are in some sense a chemical. In some sense, you are just made up of matter bouncing against one another, and electrons firing and neurons firing, and that is, in one metaphysical sense, who you are. You are a chemical, and you're affected by chemicals. And that's why you're in a better mood when you drink coffee, is because the adrenal glands are firing up, and that fight or flight mode that you're not supposed to be in is what you're actually in. So now you have abilities. You've heard of people picking up cars because of adrenaline. Well, that's what coffee does to you in a certain sense, is it takes you higher than you could be without it. But the issue is all of us come down, and you have to have more and more to sustain it. And so there's the question that this French philosopher brings up is, he says it as a statement. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And this is kind of the end-all, be-all question of all time, is what are we actually? Metaphysically, are we more than our chemistry, or are we just chemistry? And a lot of Christians would want to say, well, we're more than our chemistry, we're spiritual beings, and I agree with that. I think that was the teachings of Jesus. I think that's the teachings of the Bible, is that we're not just chemistry, but we are affected by chemistry. We are spirits that live in bodies, and bodies are affected by things like caffeine and other things that will fire our neurons, so to speak. You are in one sense, who you are is a collection of electrical impulses. They can scan your brain and see when you're more actively romantic or when you're more actively sorrowful. They can measure patterns in your brain and tell a whole lot about what you're feeling just by what neurons are firing in your brain. And we're affected by all these chemicals that we don't really even know the names for, but like oxytocin. And oxytocin is the chemical in your body that connects with trust and belonging, a feeling of security, a feeling of safety. And so oxytocin is something that we desire. And when we get a burst of oxytocin, it's a good thing. We feel good. And when we're lacking in oxytocin, we feel bad and we want more. And there's all kinds of them, endorphins, euphoria, and determination. Endorphins are released during the sexual experience a lot. It's that feeling of euphoria, of all is right with the world. Determination, I can move forward in life. And these are things that we crave. Whether we're spirits or whether we're just a bunch of matter is irrelevant to this particular part of the conversation, is that we want this stuff. Like at our core, this is stuff we crave and we hunger for that we don't really even think about. We don't think about the neurons firing on our brain a lot. We just think about what we feel. Dopamine is your chemical center for motivation to keep moving forward in life. Serotonin, safety and respect. And you'll notice these are all things we all desperately want on an existential level. Trust and belonging, euphoria, motivation, safety, respect. And then cortisol is a little bit different because cortisol has to deal with stress management. And in general, what we try to do is suppress cortisol. So where we want to build up oxytocin and some of these others. We crave them, we want them. Cortisol is one that we try to keep down a little bit. It's necessary for stress management, but scientific studies have shown that excess cortisol can literally, physiologically transform the gray matter of your brain and make you a different person. So excess stress as a child, this is what PTSD does. Post-traumatic stress disorder, is there's an extreme burst of cortisol at some point in your life. And that cortisol transforms the gray matter of your brain and literally, physically changes who you are as a human being. And so, like I mentioned, in one sense, we are captives to chemistry. Chemistry actually affects who we are. Stanton Peele, a PhD in psychiatry or psychology, wrote for Psychology Today. And it's an article called Addiction in Society, Blinded by Biochemistry. And he says, powerful experiences like gambling. And so we're talking about life-controlling issues in here for about 6 weeks. And Joseph is going to wrap up that series for us next week while I'm in Peru on our mission trip. But we're talking about life-controlling issues. And whether it's procrastination, whether it's gambling, whether it's sex addiction, whether it's people-pleasing, whether it's being a misery martyr, there's all these issues that we've talked about. And all of us have issues. I mean, if I say, what are your issues? Most of us kind of have a clue that we have issues. And what this guy is saying is that powerful experiences like some of these issues cause, they impact the same neurological reward system that drugs do. So if you take heroin, for example, it's going to kick up those endorphins. It's going to kick up those chemicals and make you king or queen of the world for a short period of time. That's what it does, and that's what you're craving. That's why people desire it. A lot of times, if you're procrastinating, the reason you're procrastinating is because you're trying to suppress cortisol on an unconscious level. You're trying to keep stress out of your life because you don't want to feel the way cortisol makes you feel. And he says, so do many other rewarding activities. If there's some such higher level neurological reward system, then it can't be said to exclude anything from sex to food to gambling to video games. Video games can be life-controlling. Sex can be life-controlling. Food can be life-controlling. And when these things become life-controlling, it's because of that chemistry. It's because we want to feel a certain way. We want our bodies to be a certain way. But he says this, and remember, this is quoted in a secular periodical, Psychology Today, one of the more respected periodicals on these topics. He says, addiction is the search for emotional satisfaction. So we're looking for a biochemical, physiological way to find emotional, metaphysical satisfaction. We're looking for something beyond the chemistry in the chemistry. For a sense of security, that's what we all want, right? These are like hierarchical needs in our lives, is a sense of security, a sense of being loved, a sense of control over life. But with these things that we're talking about, where it fires up the endorphins or it fires up the oxytocin, it says the gratification is temporary and illusory. And the behavior results instead in greater self-disgust, reduced psychological security, and poorer coping ability. That's what all addictions have in common. So he's saying when we try to satisfy these existential, deep emotional security needs through a biochemical process or through these other things like gambling or procrastination or misery martyrdom or all these other things where we try to suppress cortisol and increase the chemicals that we want, he says that's not a long-term solution for the existential needs. It's a short-term solution. And if any of you are like me when it comes to coffee, what you find is you need more and more to reach that same level of feeling good on the world. That high is harder and harder to achieve. So how do we deal with this stuff? How do we battle life-controlling issues? How do we battle the constant drive to find satisfaction in something that is, as he puts it, temporary and illusory? How do we do it? Well, the first step is to avoid it from the get-go. The first step is to try to prohibit from entering yourself into these situations where you're drawing on something that won't sustain you. There's a passage in Scripture in Ephesians that says, do not give the devil a foothold. And I know my friends Jessica and Jared just went rock climbing a couple weeks ago. And to rock climb adequately, to reach the peak, you have to follow a series of footholds. Getting to the top always starts with a first step. And so what and in here, there's probably mixed views on who the devil is, whether the devil is a personal, literal being, or whether the devil is symbolic and represents the trouble in the world or hell or the pain in the world. I'm a personal devil guy. I believe there is a personal devil, and I believe he's out to get you and hates you and wants to destroy you. I believe that. We can talk about that in another time. But the point is, he doesn't just peak in your life. Nobody wakes up one morning, and like Kate Barron talked about the other day, a couple weeks ago, nobody wakes up and says, I want to develop an eating disorder. Nobody does that. But somebody might say, I overate today, and I think I'll vomit to not gain the calories from that meal. And she's shaking her head right now. It always starts small. Chemical addiction usually starts with a free drink from someone or a free smoke from someone. And so when it comes to climbing the rock of your life, getting to the peak of your life and owning you and controlling you, the devil has very little authority. These chemicals have very little authority over your life, but it's when you give that first step. You let that foot be planted in your life and dug in deep so that next step is a little bit easier. And so that next step is a little bit easier. So what we really want to do is from the very beginning avoid these chemical dependencies, these emotional security type dependencies. And so we want to be on guard for them. The problem is most of us, at least in this room, all of us are 20 and above, and all of us have already bypassed that part of our lives. All of us have already made mistakes and already had footholds planted in us and left us in places where we have these issues that we talk about. James Butler, who is not a psychologist, but he writes with psychologists and has been published in Psychology Today, talks about his story of addiction. He says, like most children, I was bright-eyed and full of love. And look at these words that keep popping up here: love, purity, joy, and hope. I yearned for spiritual things and a connection with others and the world around me. But life dealt me a few hands that I was ill-equipped to deal with. Molly shared excellently last week about the loss of her son and how that drove this tremendous grieving process in her life and ultimately ended in a chemical addiction of sorts. I think it was wine drinking, basically, right? And alcoholism. And God has really done a major work in her life to bring her out of that. So it doesn't mean if there's footholds there that there's no hope. But what it does mean is sometimes things happen in our lives that kind of make us weak to these footholds. And that's what this psychologist or non-psychologist is expressing in Psychology Today, is that sometimes events happen that open doors. He says, I was well equipped to deal with, so searching for a way to cope. Now, he's looking to cope in the areas of love, purity, joy, hope, and spiritual things. Notice that. He wasn't receiving existential satisfaction, so he looked for a way to find it, and he looked for it in chemical things. He says, I drank to overcome my insecurities and escape the feelings that seemed painful to face. I paid a high price for this choice. So that foothold was established. Not only did I develop an addiction that left me without choice, so the addiction literally, physiologically changes the brain, and you cannot cope the same way you once could have. So I disagree with the concept of no choice, but I do think the idea of choice is altered. But I became a person who no longer resembled that child with the world at its feet. I was someone who spent every waking moment trying to manipulate the world into giving him what he needed. See, addiction is much more than just the physical condition. Note, this is published in Psychology Today. We've seen it twice now. It says it's more than a physical condition. It affects our entire lives. It is physical, emotional, and spiritual. Not only is our brain damaged by continued use, but our character and emotional life are destroyed as well. We become self-centered, self-willed, dishonest, angry, and self-destructive. And I apologize for how long this is, but I thought it was poignant. This is a spiritual crisis they publish in Psychology Today. We are not meant to be the center of the universe and consumed with selfishness. We are meant to have deep relationships with others, to serve our families and communities, and be connected to something greater than ourselves. Addiction robs us of all this, and for a spiritual problem, you need a spiritual remedy. You can get clean and repair your brain with abstinence, so the brain can be physiologically re-altered. It can happen. But that by itself will not lead to serenity, what we're really actually striving for, and a changed character. I know many people who are sober, but miserable human beings. This is what the New Testament has been teaching all along, is that our struggle is not physiological. Our struggle is not chemical. It's not about the endorphins and the cortisol. It's about something else. And it says that we fight a fight against flesh and blood, but it's not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And there seems to be this indication that the fight we're fighting, so it's interesting that the Christians and the secularists are starting to really agree on this point, that life-controlling issues are not solved on a physiological level. They can be helped, they can be assisted, but they don't solve the root issue, which they're claiming now is spiritual, emotional, existential. It's beyond physiology. The Bible says this, it says, so I say, walk by the Spirit. So the answer is spiritual, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. You're kind of at war with your physiology. For these are opposed to each other to keep you from doing the things you want to do. And then in Romans it says, for God, by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, condemned sin in the flesh in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us. And notice this, who walk not according to the flesh. So we don't walk by our physiological desires. We don't shape and focus our lives on suppression of cortisol and bursts of adrenaline. That's not how we shape our lives. There's something else. We're led by the Spirit. It says, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their mind on the things of the Spirit. As we've been talking about these life-controlling issues, we've mentioned the 12 steps of recovery that are pretty prevalent. And I've noticed that depending on who you read and where you read it, these things are phrased slightly different occasionally. But in general, they all say the same thing. And many, many, many people have received tremendous freedom through what they call the 12 steps of recovery. And I didn't want to write them out, partially because they're long. If you put the whole list, it's super long. So I kind of paraphrased 10 of them here, or this is kind of a capture of the 12 rules of recovery, basically. And this is a paraphrase of them. And number one is admit frailty. This has been the very beginning of the gospel message for all time. For as long as the story of Jesus has been told, it started with admit that you have issues. That's where the gospel of Jesus starts, is I need something. Admit you have frailty. Reach out to God. And in some sense it says God as you understand him. A higher power is how it's phrased sometimes. But in each case, it says admit that you can't do this, that you're not in control. And now reach out to someone who can help. Reach out to someone beyond you. Surrender to God. Examine yourself. Look at yourself and be honest with yourself. Confess to God and others. Ask God to cleanse you. Make amends to others. If your life-controlling issues have harmed other people, one life-controlling issue could be just rage. You're just irritable. You're just an angry human being. And maybe you're a misery martyr at the same time, and so you want to take people down with you, and so you treat your family poorly. I mean, everything you say to them is just harsh and critical. That's a life-controlling issue, and it harms other people, and it affects their brain chemistry, and there's this tidal wave that happens as a result. And one of the 12 steps of recovery is that you will admit that you have issues, reach out to God, ask for help, and then it says make amends. If you're a person who has emotionally abused your children, emotionally abused your wife, emotionally abused your husband, one of the 12 steps to making all right with the world, the steps of recovery, is that you've got to make that right with them. And it goes on, make this a continuation. In other words, these aren't one-step issues. This isn't something you just do once and then everything is golden. You continue to surrender. You continue to admit your own frailty. You continue to reach out to a force larger and more powerful than yourself. It's a continuation. Develop communication with God, and then let all this be obvious. It's so fascinating to me how the 12 steps of the recovery kind of sound like the gospel of Jesus. The gospel of Jesus has many, for centuries, been expressed as you're a sinner in need of a Savior. Reach out to that Savior and embrace him and let him come in and transform you. Do that continually, and then tell others about him. And it's a very similar, it's very spiritual, the 12 steps. And so I've been reading some articles written by atheists who are entering into recovery, because I would think it'd be extremely challenging to be an atheist and go into like an AA group, because the AA group is going to say reach out to God, surrender to God, ask for forgiveness, make things right with people. And some of those steps are intrinsically Christian or theist or deist in some sense. So an atheist that goes into recovery has to somehow get through this. But the issue is that this stuff works. I mean, as a percentage of people who go through these programs compared to other options, this works. And so there's all these articles out there written by atheists on how do I go to an AA meeting and not lose my mind because these people are psychos, right? And what you find is quotes like this. This was written by an atheist about this exact situation. He says, they have something, these people. Talking about the maniac religious people. This is what an atheist says about them. This says, there's something going on here. You can feel it. And you can see it in the smiles of the best of them. Some of their stories are a lot worse than yours, and they're fat and happy now. They have a solution to this endless, insane habit of eating yourself alive for emotional sustenance. Notice that again, that what you're looking for isn't the thing. It isn't the issue itself. You're looking for some kind of emotional sustenance, and you're trying to fulfill it in some other way. And that's admitted here once again in a secular situation. It's gnawing away at your own heart. It says they're not getting loaded and they're not white-knuckling it. They just don't need it anymore. You're pretty sure there's no God up there, so what in the world is at work here? White-knuckling it means you're just trying so hard not to drink, or not to use, or not to gamble, or not to look at porn, or not to be angry at your wife, or whatever it is. You're in a physical, flesh-type way, you're just trying so hard. And this atheist comes into these AA meetings and says, it doesn't feel like what these people are doing. There's something else going on here. And then he concludes with this thought. He says, here's the nut of what they have going in a quote from their literature. This is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. In some sense, freedom and recovery from life-controlling issues, whatever it is, whatever your issue is, whatever my issue is not it doesn't happen by trying super hard. It doesn't happen by girding up your loins, which is a really funny expression, I think. It doesn't happen by just saying, okay, I won't. That's not how it happens. The way it happens is because those existential needs you have for security, for emotional connections and relational connections, and for love, for peace, for hope, and for joy, because those are being satisfied in a proper place. That's where real freedom comes from. And so when we talk about these things, we're not saying, hey, if you gamble, you're bad and you should stop gambling. What we're saying is, if you gamble, you're looking for something that in the place you shouldn't be. You're looking for something in a place that will drag you down and drag everybody else down with you. Instead, you ought to be finding it in the proper place. My opinion on that is that the proper place is in being who you were designed to be, which is a person in a right, worshipful relationship with your Creator. That's my opinion on it. I know not everybody carries that same opinion, but I believe that is the key to recovery. I believe that's the key to transformation in your life. And it's not to dismiss biochemistry. It's really not. But it is to say that the root issue is beyond biochemistry. So what solution would I pitch today? I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the solutions. But I do think that undergirding so if you have this desire to be free of something, let's just continue with the idea of anger. Let's just say you're an irritable person, and your irritation and your anger has major impacts on your life. Let's just use that as the simplest example right now. My opinion is that if you want to conquer that anger, if you want to conquer that irritability, one of the best places you can start is searching out your spiritual life and starting there. Is building the foundation of a spiritual life and connecting with God in a meaningful way and letting Him play a part in transforming you. I don't know exactly how the brain works. I'm not a neurologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. But I do know this, that I've seen lots and lots of people get a hold of Jesus and try to emulate Jesus, and things like anger just kind of fall off. I have a friend who once beat a man to near death with a baseball bat for looking at his girlfriend wrong. Spent time in jail over it, but fell in love with Jesus. And today he's the most serene, peaceful guy you'd ever meet in your life. And I've met a lot of people like that. A lot of people that had life-controlling issues that surrendered to Jesus and everything was changed. The Bible teaches in 2 Corinthians that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. That God's Spirit comes in and transforms people and brings freedom from life-controlling issues. So I hope we've made it clear that we're not saying, you're doing bad stuff, stop doing bad stuff. That's not our message here at all. Our message is that you were made to connect with other people and connect with God in meaningful ways, and that's what you're looking for in life. And if you're looking for satisfaction and you're looking for serenity somewhere else, you're not going to find it there. That there's really only one place to find out existentially who you were designed to be. So, on a practical level, what do you do? Romans chapter 12 starts with this. It says, I urge you, brothers and sisters, talking about the mercies of God, based on the mercies of God, that you present your body, I'm paraphrasing, but it says, you present your body as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing or acceptable unto God. And then it says this, and I don't know what this version says. This is the Amplified Version. It says, this is your rational, logical, intelligent act of worship. Some versions say this is your practical act of worship, or this is the reasonable thing to do. Scientists around the world believe that about 14 billion years ago, the entire universe was confined to a pinpoint. Now, theologians disagree on the timing of that, but virtually every philosopher or scientist or theologian today does believe there was a beginning to time. Einstein taught that time and matter and space were correlative. In other words, you can't have time without space, and you can't have space without matter, and so forth. And philosophers believe that there could not be an eternity of days before this day because you can't actually traverse an infinite. If there were an infinite amount of days before this day, we could never arrive at today. I know this is kooky stuff, but my point is this, is that kind of across the spectrum, everybody believes there was this beginning to everything. Scientists will call it the singularity. It's that all the matter that is now in this room that forms these chairs and this music stand and this skull in your head, all that matter was confined to this point that was smaller than a fraction of 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 a pin. And you could say fraction 1 billion times and still not get to the smallness of this moment, the singularity. And they believe all that matter exploded into everything. That eventually all these chairs that are formed right here in front of you, all that matter was contained in that explosion and just was cast out into the universe like kicking up dust. And it all formed together and coalesced to eventually form you sitting here in this chair. And in your mouth right now is this little wormy snake we call a tongue. I bit my tongue last week on the back. I've never done that before in my life. I bit the back of my tongue. And I don't know why I've never done that, but it's hurt for days now because those molars, man, when they chomp down on that tongue, there's nothing pleasant about that. And I've been thinking about it ever since then, that little tongue in my head, like right now you're thinking about your tongue. You were not thinking about your tongue 30 seconds ago, right? But that little dude, think about it the next time you eat, how that dude little dances around in there and pushes the food from tooth to tooth. And then when you swallow it, kind of does this thing and pushes it to the back of your throat. And you never once even think about it. And that tongue in your mouth that does these spectacular things that you don't have to consciously ever think about was formulated X amount of years ago in this massive explosion where all the matter that would one day become your tongue was contained and thrown out into the universe, and here you are. And there's all these constants in the universe that if the moon was closer to us or further away, we would be dead. If the gravitational force was less or more. If the earth spun slower, we would all fly into space. If the earth spun faster, we would all be crushed under its weight. We live in a... So at Daylight Church, we call worship giving credit where credit is due. And there's something really spectacular about this system. And I'm of the opinion that giving credit where credit is due is one of the foundational truths and foundational concepts in avoiding life-controlling issues. Is finding your satisfaction in the teleology of the tongue, the creator of the tongue, that put that little dude in there and covered it with little bumps just for you to experience the pleasure of taste. I mean, it's really spectacular, and every single day can be filled with wonder just by looking around. I'm convinced your reasonable act of worship is to look and say, wow. And I think that's the foundation for recovery, in my opinion. This passage continues on. It says, don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you can test and see what God's will is, his good, pleasing will. It says that if you'll allow God to shape your brain, that God wants to come in and shape the way you think about things, and that gray matter can be transformed, and the way you view the world can be transformed. So here's my practical thing for you. It's a dare. I dare you to do this. Now, some of you do it all the time. It's no big deal to you. Sometimes you do it here in a service even. But it talks about, in that Romans 12:1, it talks about surrendering your bodies to God, which is your reasonable act of service. In other words, he is the creator of the tongue. You ought to give the tongue to him. He is the creator of your hands and feet. Your hands and feet ought to belong to him. So here's my challenge to you. And some of you are comfortable doing this and some of you are not. And I'm not going to ask you to do it in here. I think it's great to do it in here. I want to encourage you to do this. I know this sounds kooky to some. I know you come to churches and you see people raising their hands to God in worship all the time. And for some of you, that just feels awkward. I grew up Lutheran, so the first time I ever raised my hands in a church, I went. Right? I want to encourage you, by yourself sometime, do that physical act. It says, present your bodies to God, which is a reasonable thing to do. What is that? Universally, this is a universal sign of what? Praise or surrender. If I'm in a battle and I want to come out from hiding, that's what I do, right? I'm like, okay, I'm yours. I'm at your disposal now. I surrender. I give it up. And then the other thing it indicates is, this morning, my son, my wife texted me and said, Juddy just drank a big bottle of ibuprofen at home, right? Yeah, right. So my wife neglected my child this morning, right? She texted me and said he drank a whole bottle. And not a whole bottle, a third of a bottle. So she was calling poison control to make sure this was going to be okay. And one of the people here who has a medical background said he'll be fine, he'll just be a little bit sleepy. But when I saw him come into the church and I reached my hands for him, what do you think he did? He did this. Daddy was there, right? Finally, he wasn't left with mom, right? No, he's a mama's boy, so sometimes he would hold his hands back. But that's what this is. It's a universal sign of surrender, and it's a reaching. It's reaching. It's that list here. It's that reaching out. And I want to encourage you to, by yourself, if you've never done this, start there. Start by yourself and reach out physically to God, and then just tell him. Tell him what's on in your head. You might say to him, I don't know you. I'm not even sure you're there. But the tongue is pretty fascinating. My mind is pretty amazing. I'm kind of enthralled with just being. And even if it starts there, I am a believer that God will respond to that. I'm a believer that God answers those kinds of prayers. Or you might be at a place where you're fully convinced that Jesus was the Son of God and you're following him and you're baptized and you want to be his. And same thing. It's just audibly worship him. Learn to worship him in private. Learn to worship him in physical ways, in private, and then allow that to carry into your public life. I know it's weird to come in here and raise your hands and you think everybody's looking at you. Look, nobody even likes you. They don't even look at you. Nobody cares, right? Nobody cares about you as much as you care about you. That's the reality. Not even your spouse cares that much about you. So you come in here and you're like, well, if I do this, everybody's going to be looking at me. If I do this, nobody's looking at you and nobody cares. But I'm encouraging you to worship God. And I think worship is the solution to life-controlling issues.